Welcome back. In the first session, we looked at observable parameters for water using remote sensing. We look at the advantages and disadvantages of remote sensing for water resource management, and we looked at some of the thematic areas in which we can apply remote sensing in water resource management. For this session, the second session of remote sensing for water resource management applications, we are going to be looking at examples of remote sensing in monitoring of endangered species and also the monitoring of harmful algal blooms, ABS. So these are the two objectives that will guide our session for today. Let's start with the example of Turtle Watch. This is an example of a map that provides up-to-date information about the thermal habitat of loggerhead sea turtles. These sea turtles are endangered species in the Pacific Ocean, the northern part of the Pacific Ocean, close to the Hawaiian Islands. And because of their endangered nature, there is need to actually monitor their habitat so that we know how to prevent contact with long-line fishing vessels, because those fishing vessels, they go for swordfish and other fish species in this region, in the same particular region, in the Pacific Ocean, north of the Hawaiian Islands. So, and we know that if we have this contact, some of the time we will find a situation whereby the turtle gets stuck in the long-line fishing lines. So these put their life at risk and further drive them down to extinction. So because over the years it is known that this has been one of the major ways by which these turtles died, because they always get stuck in the net and they get killed in the process. So in order to prevent this from happening, we looked at the Turtle Watch looked at creating a system by which fishing vessels know where not to fish. Essentially, where they are likely to be in contact with these endangered species. So this information gives them an update on where not to fish, because those places have high probability that there will be these loggerhead sea turtle present. So they should not fish in these kind of waters. But how do we know that? One of the ways by which this was mapped out is by looking at the favorable water condition in terms of temperature which these turtles like to be in. They like to feed in there. They like to play around in this ocean temperature and ocean current condition. So by mapping out where these particular temperatures, for example, most loggerhead turtles stay in water it must be colder than 18.5 degrees centigrade. So we need to map out where are places with lesser than this temperature. Once we have this temperature and below, we know that there is high probability that loggerhead sea turtle will be present. If we look at this example here, where we have one of the map shown here, okay, so which means if we look at, we're looking at 65.5 degrees centigrade. So anything below these is where we expect to find the loggerhead sea turtle. So the red areas are not usually quite favorable because they are warmer, but as we are looking at the slightly green and lemon green and darker green and then to blue areas, those areas are likely to have presence of loggerhead sea turtle. So we will expect that fishing vessels, those long-line fishing vessels, will not be fishing around these areas. So, for example, this is for 2019 October 27. This is a map. So a clear indication could be given to fishers that do not fish between solid black, these areas where we have this temperature to help reduce logger sea turtle, logger ice sea turtle interaction. So is a very practical example of how the understanding from sea surface temperature captured through remote sensing covering a wide area can be used to actually advise on how to actually prevent contact with this particular endangered species. So these are being created to help manage this situation whereby the interaction between the loggerhead sea turtle and longline fishing vessels are reduced, because by the reduction of such, the species can be saved. So imagine if you have to go to the field and measure water temperature across these areas. It becomes daunting because you have to provide this advice on a regular basis. So even if you have to put monitors there, it can also be challenging, because how many monitors will you have to set up in this very wide area? So it's important that remote sensing can be used in this area to actually offer to reduce interaction by monitoring favorable water condition for this particular endangered species. So moving on from this, we can look at another example where we look at harmful algal bloom forecast. And by the way, before I go on, you can get to learn more about this example by going to this website. Okay, you can see the most recent data and the most recent warnings and guidelines given to longline fishing vessels in respect to loggerhead sea turtles. So back to harmful algal bloom forecasting. This is a platform that was developed across the United States by NOAA for monitoring of harmful algal bloom. But before we move on, let's look at what does this mean when we say harmful algal bloom. These are blooms of algae that, for example, the one we call the red tide, which is quite common off the coast of Texas, which can cause illness and death in humans and animals. As you can see the example here, this is a situation, a recent example. You can see the coloration of the water. This algal bloom has significant health implications for people and animals. So they need to be monitored, and you can see this is just from a flight flying by and capturing a picture. It's quite visible and obvious, and based on this we can start looking at how do we use the information gathered to help people, to advise them on what to do. So some of this, especially for the red tide, this one shown here, it is the species Carena brevis. It produces also an airborne toxin. So it's not only that it's present in the water, the toxin it produces can also go airborne, causing respiratory distress in vulnerable people, and also it surely have negative impact, because I don't think anybody would want to swim in this water with this kind of red coloration showing up. So clearly, we can use remote sensing to monitor this bloom and create a forecast for stakeholders, especially the tourism industry and local environmental agency, to advise people on what to do. Here is a recent example of some of the advisory that was given, and on where it is highly likely to find the algal bloom. For example, around here where we have the red and then the orange, moderate, and the blue we have low, and in the whitish area we have low or non-incidence of the red tide or the harmful algal bloom. So this is a bulletin that is given that was released on October 28, 2019, based on satellite and remote sensing for this area. So let's dig deep into some of the other examples of this kind of situation. In the Great Lakes, where one of the lake is Lake Erie, which is one of these lakes, and it usually hosts a toxic cyanobacteria blooms, one of those herbs that we're talking about, amphoalgal bloom. So by looking at so this is Lake Erie, okay, around you can see Detroit, you can see Cleveland and Buffalo. So these lakes, as part of the Great Lakes, usually have this amphoalgal bloom regularly, okay, and often it's as a result of nutrients coming into the lake as a result of human activities, farmland, effluents and things like that. Usually bring so much nutrients into the water body, which often result in the growth and the bloom of this algal cyanobacteria. So this colony, for the one that is found in Lake Erie, is as a result of the colony of microcytes. So they float on the surface during calm period, and they mix down into the water column during the windy period. So wind makes them mix up with the water body, down the water body. So the mixing of these cyanobacteria, their bloom, is influenced by wind speed, the heating and cooling of the surface water, so creating a kind of thermal stratification across the water layers. So these different density also affect how they move around from places to places within the water body. So by using by using remote sensing, we can actually monitor how these blooms are moving around, and we can actually observe them. And over the years, the Great Lake, the GLERL, they have been able to develop a system whereby they are able to monitor what is going on. So in this particular system, they combine remote sensing and also in situ measurement to be able to model the dynamics of the movement of this algal bloom. And as you can see here, is based on chlorophyll A, and this is the measurement, the concentration of the chlorophyll A within the water body. And there's an animation here that shows how this happens from 2018 over several days. We can see the dynamics of this movement across Lake Erie. So you can see that the concentration is initially lower, but over the days things get, so there's a particular period where when this there is an increase in this bloom, but by monitoring this, it can serve as advisory for people on what they need to do. And also this supports the local water agency in knowing the potential impact of this bloom, or knowing when to do abstraction of water so that they don't end up getting the blooms into the water system for the surrounding cities. So the current model that is being used combines fluid dynamic model and remote sensing as well as field measurement to do bloom location forecast. So we can look at an example here and capture some of the essence of what the work is all about.
We are collecting samples of the Lake Erie algal bloom that occurs annually. This is important because these types of measurements will help us in understanding the drivers of the bloom, drivers of bloom toxicity.
Since 2008, U of M has been working with WRM to run a harmful algal bloom monitoring program in the western basin of Lake Erie and in Saginaw Bay, Lake Huron. We have sort of two main components. The one is the weekly on-the-water sampling, the research vessel cruises that we do. A second component to our monitoring is these continuous monitoring buoys. One of the advances that we made in response to the Toledo drinking water crisis that happened in 2014 was to make this network real-time. We have 4 of these buoys in western Lake Erie, and we have a suite of instruments that are mounted about 1 meter into the water at the bottom of the buoys, and these instruments are able to provide continuous measurements of algal densities and water quality conditions. The instruments are powered by solar panels on the buoy, and then that data is relayed in real time through a cellular modem. Of course, with our sampling, we can only get out once a week, but the instruments basically can produce measurements every minute or 15 minutes and report that continuously. You can see if you're going to have a bloom be advected into your water intake area, for example.
We know some of the main factors that cause the blooms themselves. That's nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, that are running off of farms and into our waters.
A heavy production of algae in itself isn't bad. It's just if they have these secondary effects of producing toxins that can create a human health effect.
One major question that we haven't answered is what controls the toxicity of these organisms. So in the very same species of cyanobacterium, you can have some strains that are toxic and others that are non-toxic, and that's what we're trying to understand.
So that's a quick example of what is being done for ARPS focusing and hypoxia monitoring using remote sensing combined with in-situ measurement and also regular measurement operations. So this gives you an idea of what is currently being done in terms of harmful algal bloom monitoring, as well as using remote sensing for supporting protection of endangered species. So what have we looked at so far in this session 2? We have looked at example of using remote sensing for monitoring loggerhead sea turtle, an endangered species. We have looked at the utilization of the understanding of the favorable waters for this species in their habitat monitoring. We have examined the use of visual cues from remotely sensed data to monitor harmful algal blooms, and also we have looked at example whereby we use easily observable characteristics of ocean surface to allow for rapid assessment and monitoring of harmful algal blooms. So this is the end of session 2. I'll see you in the next session where we'll talk more about examples of application of remote sensing in water resource management.